South Carolina's Highway Patrol tells us that there is nothing they take more serious than DUI. But what happens if you spot someone who you think is driving unsafe and possibly impaired?
That's happened to me when I was driving. I bet it's happened to a lot of people watching right now at home. You call 911, ask for help before someone gets hurt. But no matter how badly the Highway Patrol troopers want to respond, sometimes they are too far away and stretched too thin to be able to help. And that is the issue we're investigating tonight. It's a weekday afternoon on Interstate 385 when a passenger headed north sees something so alarming she calls 911.
Lawrence County 911, what's the address of your emergency?
And makes a dire prediction.
Yeah, it's this car that's all over the road. They're going to kill somebody. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, God.
The caller describes a gold Mercury, reads the license plate, and tells dispatchers the driver appears impaired. And moments later, another driver spots the same car.
I said, scan Mercury, whatever. Anyways, he's all over the road. She's coming up behind us, and she's like over in the yellow line. Oh, gosh.
That Mercury would eventually prompt a third emergency call, but by then it was too late. State investigators say that car slammed into a tractor on Highway 308 in Lawrence County. The crash killed a 29-year-old farmer named Wesley Robinson. The first caller's terrifying prediction,
airbags have been deployed on the car and it's a Mercury,
had come true.
He doesn't have a pulse?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just to confirm, he doesn't have a pulse?
Yes, ma'am.
According to his death certificate, Wesley Robinson passed away at 2:05 p.m., exactly 20 minutes after the Highway Patrol was first alerted to a swerving car with what looked like an impaired driver. While other emergency responders got to the scene soon after the crash, the first trooper, the state's first line of defense against a drunk driver, didn't get there till after 3 o'clock. That's 1 hour and 18 minutes after the first 911 call. And because of the way the Highway Patrol is organized at dispatch and on the road, this can happen again. This investigation began with a personal experience. This happened to me on this Greenville County road last December. Listen.
You guys gotta hurry. Hammett Bridge Road, Greenville County. I just witnessed a hit-and-run accident involving what appeared to be a high school student. This guy is all over the road. He's almost hit 3 other people.
I saw a car drift through this intersection and T-bone a pickup that was just sitting at the light, and the car kept going, drifting back across into this grass and then back into the street. So that's why I called 911, and the Greenville County dispatcher then referred me to the Highway Patrol.
What type of vehicle is it?
He's off the side of the road now. He just swerved back into oncoming traffic.
I followed that car past 2 schools, Riverside High and then Riverside Middle, at dismissal time with kids and parents along the side of the road.
He's about to crash again.
The car smashed into this neighborhood sign, backed up, and sped off, crashing again with me behind him on the phone.
He just crashed again.
So I waited for Highway Patrol to arrive while blocking the car in a driveway. And after waiting more than a half hour, I never saw a trooper.
When that call comes in that there is a DUI or a suspected DUI driver out there on the roadway, it's all hands on deck. We're going to do everything in our power to get a trooper to you at that point in time.
Thank you for calling the South Carolina Highway Patrol Dispatch Center. All of our representatives are busy assisting other callers.
The first caller the day Wesley Robinson died got that message after Lawrence County dispatchers sent the call to Highway Patrol. I got the same thing after calling 911 in Greenville County.
Thank you for calling the South Carolina Highway Patrol Dispatch Center.
And we've heard from other callers who report the same delay. Once the Highway Patrol dispatcher answers, the search begins for an available trooper. Why does it take so long sometimes?
So it's just the backup. It's just the number of collisions. You know, you've got 34, 35 calls for service. You've got 10 troopers working. You do the math.
Take Greenville County. On a typical day, there are 10 troopers working 12-hour shifts. They're assigned to geographic zones 1, 2, 3, and 4. One trooper drives along 385, another patrols 85. And all those troopers spend most of their day covering collisions. Because in South Carolina, that's almost always the exclusive responsibility of state troopers. From fender benders on state highways and overturned trucks on county roads, to this fender bender at the Wendy's drive-thru. While a few police departments handle crashes in their own city limits, troopers handle everything else.
Seems like it's going to be very difficult for that few troopers to cover that many cars in that many places. Is it?
You know, that's a hard thing to answer because that's how we've always worked that way.
We use the Freedom of Information Act to get the dispatcher logs from 2 days this year. We're looking at the time between 3 and 7 p.m. on days when we knew there was rain, so we knew there'd be a lot of crashes. In 8 hours, those 10 troopers were dispatched 61 times. We found a fatal crash in West Greenville. A 47-year-old died after hitting a pole. Callers notified Highway Patrol at 5:07 and 5:08, and again at 5:31. The first trooper arrived at 5:33, and while the average response time was about 20 minutes, 7 calls took more than an hour.
But in a normal day, that's very, very common that we'll have more collisions taking place than we actually have troopers, and we have to prioritize those collisions.
And this is where a backup becomes a bottleneck, because when troopers are tied up, potentially life-saving minutes tick away. Only after a supervisor realizes there's no way to respond in time are other agencies, like county deputies, who may be much closer, told to be on the lookout. In my case, it was a Greenville County deputy who eventually arrived, mostly because of his personal connection. The victim of that hit-and-run crash was his son. And in the case of Wesley Robinson, a local dispatcher alerted deputies after the second 911 call. It was their crew that was first to respond to the scene of the crash, where they say they finally found the driver of a gold Mercury.
And what about the female in the vehicle? Is she okay?
Yeah, she's got some cuts, but she's all right. She's up walking around.
All right. What type of vehicle is it, sir? The one that the lady was driving?
All right, there's airbags have been deployed on the car, and it's a Mercury.
Yeah, the woman you saw there is Tara Mahan. She is charged with felony DUI in that Lawrence County crash. At the time, she was already facing an unrelated DUI charge from just 2 months before. She is still awaiting trial. And Amy, since we started promoting this story, I've heard from several active troopers and some former troopers. You heard Sergeant Ryan in our story say they have 10 troopers on each Greenville County shift. But that's not always the case. For example, multiple troopers told me that this very week, on Tuesday night, there were 4 troopers working the roads in Greenville County and just 1 in all of Spartanburg County, meaning the scenario we just described can actually be much worse.
So what is the solution, Gordon? You know, you talked about that opportunity for Highway Patrol to acknowledge they don't have the people, get another agency that's closer to get there. Can they change the system to make that happen faster?
Yeah, you put your finger on it exactly there, Amy. So there are 2 things that might work here. One would simply be more manpower. The Highway Patrol,
Sure.
like every law enforcement agency in South Carolina, has got to get more recruits on the road, and they've got to streamline that process. So if you have more people per shift, you can cover more area. But yet, that idea of dispatch, for instance, when I call 911 and I say car, immediately that call is pushed off to another agency, in this case Highway Patrol, and then there is time that passes as they try to locate a trooper, a supervisor makes a call, and it is pushed back to a county dispatcher. Streamlining that process could get every available law enforcement unit searching for what in these cases, Amy, is literally a matter of life and death with dangerous drivers on the roads. It's as serious as it gets for law enforcement.
Absolutely incredible story, Gordon. There are a lot of ways to say thank you, and just saying it is a pretty good start.
It sure is. Sometimes, though, we need other ways to show our veterans how much we appreciate the sacrifices they've made. So tonight, we'd like to introduce you to a group of upstate men and women who put in some long hours to give a gift of love more powerful than words. The men, and mostly women, who gather here, a house they call the Sew Inn, are all volunteers. Once a week.
I look forward to Monday every week.
Almost every week.
The only Monday that we haven't sewn for, 3.5 years was Christmas Day. And I would have come, but, nobody else would.
This house that is no one's home is part sewing circle, part textile mill, and completely dedicated to a single purpose, a weekly sacrifice of time and talent.
There are many steps in preparing it that people don't understand.
And a gift of terrific patience.
It's very tedious. You have to be very precise with the squares you cut out.
If you consider it takes sometimes as much as 40 hours to make one of these. Maybe longer, depending on how complex it is.
But those who have given so much more than their time.
This quilt is for Bruce Holcomb. I know that he's a veteran. He lives in Greenville. I'm making two, one for he and one for his brother.
I'm making 11 of them, and then we'll put names on them when I get all 11 made.
Everyone here is working for Quilts of Valor, and every one of these quilts will honor an American veteran. There are QOV chapters all over the country, stitched together in 15 years since a single Delaware woman, whose own son was stationed in Iraq, wanted something that felt like home. And now, this Anderson group will tackle its biggest challenge yet, 70 quilts to 70 vets on one Wednesday in November.
It's very hard. I just finished my first one. This is my second one, so I'm new at this.
Here's why that matters. When heroes like David Watts returned from Vietnam, there was no big welcome home, no parade to honor his service. Even now, thousands of South Carolina men and women face combat overseas and return to civilian life with little fanfare. Their service and sacrifice rarely makes news. But even the toughest characters, those who have fired upon an enemy and come back, deserve a public embrace. Something that says, "Welcome home." These public presentations, called wrapping, say just that. A symbolic embrace that means so much to vets and their families. When Dave Watts got sick, just a few months after his wrapping, it was his quilt that kept him warm. The same quilt that covered his body when he died.
It's just an honor to be able to make quilts for them as a reward to thank them.
I don't think it's the quilt, it's the thought behind the quilt that somebody cared enough to do something for them.
At the sew-in, many of these quilters have their own military ties. Tina's husband was in the Navy, Marion's served in Vietnam. Tommy Forrest, who runs this chapter, was in the Air Force.
I can't put it into words. When I got my quilt, October 22nd of 2013, I didn't think that anything could feel any better. And then 2 weeks later, I wrapped a quilt that I made around a friend at church, and it's just as good when you wrap as when you receive.
So for 11 months, these quilters piled patterns, stitched seams, and poured their hearts into an ambitious project. Countless hours of meticulous labor.
Some of them served in World War II, so I'm anxious to get them wrapped.
Will finally pay off.
It is a very big deal when you know you're doing something for somebody that fought for their country.
Robert Johns and Irvin Jones.
This Anderson County church, 70 veterans from World War II and Korea.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those who served in Vietnam or kept watch in times of peace.
I think it's the fact that nobody ever thought to do anything for them like that. I think that's what it is.
One at a time, took a position of honor. Got the embrace of a house full of stitchers and the warmth of home.
And tears just flow. While we're sewing this, we're thinking of them, and we have love in this. We put love in this quilt.
So we had to show you this one. Tommy Forrest made this by hand. We showed you he was the Air Force veteran who is leading that chapter. And this is not an official Quilt of Valor because Tommy made this for me by hand and put all that work in there. All of these are just absolutely beautiful, and the effort they put into this is absolutely terrific, Malachi.
Yeah,
sure. Thank you very much. So, Amy, it's just unbelievable to see the work these people put into everything they do. Every single quilt they make, it carries a tremendous amount of love.
I think the thing I love Tommy saying the most is it feels as good to wrap as it is to receive, which is sort of a life lesson, isn't it? That giving back, it means so much. It's so
It's true. And of course, Tommy's a veteran himself. I mean, look, every one of these veterans has already given a lot. No matter how they served, they have given a lot. And they are tough people, right? I mean, you have to be to serve in our armed services. But every one of them does get a little emotional when you see them get wrapped in that way. So it is very moving.
So there are ways we can help with this, right?
I'm so glad you asked that because I almost forgot to say it. Okay, Quilts of Valor is a national organization. They want to wrap every single man and woman who has served in this country. So if you go to our website, WSPA.com, I put information on how you can donate, or if you've got skill on sewing, well, they'd certainly like your help making those quilts as well.
There's work to be done. Gordon, thank you. We often talk here about the opioid crisis. Tonight we're going to talk very specifically about heroin.
And we'll talk about the people who use it and the risks to public health, including the dangerous spread of HIV and hepatitis. You're about to meet one man who has a mission to keep those addicts more healthy.
It's about 6 p.m. on a Thursday in Greenville County. Substance abuse counselor Mark Burrows is off work.
So usually it's just a phone call or a text message.
And on call.
They're a little skeptical at first. They don't necessarily trust me at first.
On this night, he's meeting a heroin addict at a strip mall on Greenville's north side.
Yeah, I don't even know who I'm looking for. How are you?
The addict, we've concealed her identity, spots Mark's white Hondas circling the parking lot. And Mark, who works to get addicts clean,
We got cottons, cookers, Narcan, fentanyl test strips, 3 types of syringes.
will help this woman get a cleaner, or at least safer, high.
Let me get some more fentanyl tests because I just heard word on the street is there's a new batch in Greenville.
I'll give you some of these too.
Burrows is by himself running South Carolina's only needle exchange program from the trunk of his car. Each Friday he sets up a table with bottles of water and condoms.
You need anything else? We got syringes, a bunch of stuff, man.
He targets neighborhoods where he knows people use needles for illegal drugs.
People are using drugs, you know, with or without me, you know. I don't think they need any help from me. I mean, the reality is they're going to use drugs whether I'm here or not.
Before he was an addiction counselor, Burrows was an addict, and by sharing needles, he infected himself with hepatitis C. He founded Challenges Incorporated as a way of keeping other addicts alive and relatively healthy until they're ready for treatment. Research at the Centers for Disease Control appears to support his methods. 50% of new Hep C cases are IV drug users. And in South Carolina, hepatitis C infection rates are up 48% from 2010 to 2015. By treating the spread of disease with clean needles, Burrows may be saving taxpayer money. Treating an uninsured addict would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Clean needles cost 10 cents. And by collecting the used, possibly infected needles.
I mean, the other thing we're trying to do is keep law enforcement safe by needle sticks. You know, there's a high percentage of law enforcement that got stuck by a syringe in their career.
We found them discarded in public areas. On this Friday, Burrows set up behind a chain convenience store along a busy South Greenville highway. Our photographer, Kevin, found this needle, likely thrown out the window of a parked car. Burrows got a tip that the woods back here are filled with homeless and local prostitutes. There's clear evidence of heroin use, including more needles lying in the grass.
That one, the tip's broken off.
And while here, his needle exchange hotline gets another call to a local hotel and a woman who may be looking to get clean.
I know this one young girl who literally will go around to motels where she knows there are needle users and dig through the trash. It's life-saving. I mean, you have people in this area, a couple who have been sharing the same needle for 3 weeks now.
We got some Narcan. I'm gonna put a couple business cards for other people. And then this is like an opioid hotline.
So far, it's a small operation, working on donated supplies and small gifts of cash.
Got the pharmacist donations. I had a doctor donate. Then I had harm reduction coalitions from all over the country sending me Narcan. But I need more either syringes donated or money to buy syringes donated.
Yeah. But Burrows has big plans, trying to save this invisible population.
They're desperate for help, and they're calling me.
Yeah, man.
Take it easy, dude.
In the middle of an opioid crisis for Burroughs and the people he serves, a clean needle may be the first step to getting clean.
People are going to have strong opinions about what he's doing. As you heard in the story, Mark is looking for donations to buy more supplies. If that's something you would be interested in, I've included his email address in this story on WSPA.com.
What an incredible look into the situation and into Mark's work. Why aren't there more Marks, Gordon?
It's interesting that there aren't. There is a stigma attached to it. Already when we posted that this story was coming up, there's already this sort of feedback of, well, people make the choice to use IV drugs and they're stuck with the consequences. So that stigma is really hard for people like Mark to work past. And so what he is trying to do is tell people, look, if you stop the spread of hepatitis and HIV in these users, you also cut down on the spread on people who are not using these drugs, and that's a public health issue.
Absolutely, Gordon.
In South Carolina, hundreds of convicted criminals have been given a fresh start by a 7-person committee in Columbia. This includes some offenders who committed violent crimes.
The Parole and Pardon Board has the power to erase all the penalties and restore all the rights taken away by someone's criminal conviction. Now, for many of those people, it's a chance to build an honest life after serving their time in prison. But our investigation found some of these pardoned offenders go right back to a life of crime. And that 7-person board has nothing but their own instincts to tell them who deserves a second chance. This is where our story of William Tommy Smith will come to an end. It's where police say he beat this woman, Brenda K. Tanner, to death using a baseball bat that she kept in her bedroom for her own protection. Smith has a 42-year criminal record. He got early release from prison and had several second chances to turn his life around. But now he may have finally confessed to a crime that South Carolina can't forgive.
There's good people in this neighborhood. They all been out this morning talking about praying for the family, which I very much so encourage you to do. And you know, this is a crazy thing.
William Tommy Smith's criminal record begins back in 1976. He was 21 years old when he robbed a Dairy Queen and went to prison. In 1981, he was convicted of grand larceny at Spartanburg General and got probation. Then in July of 1989, Smith robbed a convenience store. He stole beer and cigarettes before leading Spartanburg police on a high-speed chase. One of the officers involved told me Smith intentionally rammed his cruiser, flipping it end over end. And here's what another officer told us at the scene.
When I got down here, the police car had already turned over, and I saw some smoke, and I didn't see my officers that was in that police car. And what worried me is the car could catch on fire, and finally I saw one of the officers come out.
Well, Smith was sent to prison for 10 years for assault and battery with intent to kill. He got out in 5. He robbed a little cricket in 1997, threatened to shoot the clerk while taking just $30 from the drawer. The judge gave him 12 years. Smith served 2, released on parole. And then, in 2014, Smith got the biggest break of all. His whole record, including multiple convictions for drugs and domestic violence, got a full pardon, which it turns out shouldn't be a surprise, because in South Carolina, the Board of Paroles and Pardons pardons violent criminals every month.
This is the day we feel good. It really is. We're helping a lot of people here today.
The board meets once a month in this Columbia conference room. Each meeting is dozens of 5-minute sprints.
Case number 2, Donald Austin. Number 3, Shannon Belton.
So tell me how a pardon's going to help you.
In this January meeting, 5 board members will decide 64 cases. 49 of the people who asked for a pardon, that's 75%, get one. The board pardoned the same percentage the month before. And while there are some rules for getting a pardon, the final decision is almost entirely subjective. While members have access to pardon applications and criminal records, there are no real rules for who gets pardons. Instead, it's the opinion of the board members.
But the armed robbery is what I'm concerned about. How'd you get involved in that?
It's their judgment on each applicant that determines who the state forgives.
I want to get that behind me. I really want to see what's out there for me.
The board's chairman is a retired businessman named Henry Eldridge. He asks most of the questions.
Any questions being board members?
In at least one January case, Eldridge and another member said they granted a pardon to someone they planned to deny.
How you doing today, Mr. Gilchrist? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. How yourself?
Because during his 5-minute in-person interview, he convinced them he was reformed. Despite his convictions for pointing and presenting a weapon and assault, the personal face-to-face meeting earned him a pardon.
I'm personally looking, has the person changed? If the person had a drug problem, did they take care of that? Have they shown that they're part of their community? Have they shown that they understand?
In an instant, that pardon restores many civil rights, like the right to serve on a jury or hold public office. But the real impact is for applicants convicted of violent gun crimes.
So, Mr. Austin, you've got a pretty lengthy record.
Once pardoned, gun rights are fully restored. Last month, we watched 2 men with armed robbery convictions get their gun rights restored.
Mr. Austin will be granted a pardon today. The vote is unanimous. Everybody knows on this board that that's my hot button, and I'm the biggest second rights amendment guy in the room. But if a guy has assault charges against him, and the reason he wants is to get a concealed weapon permit, I'm going to ask a lot of questions.
William Tommy Smith convinced the board he was reformed in 2014. In his pardon application, he wrote, "I have given my life to the Lord and am in the ministry," which is true. He was a deacon at Mount Sinai Baptist Church. In fact, his pastor, James Splon, attended the pardon hearing. And Smith was married now. After his last early release, he married his parole officer. And that, plus a full decade without another arrest, convinced his church, his family, and friends that he had ended his violent criminal career.
He was just normal. She opened his eyes, you know. And she was always going to church and everything. And she quit her job and went back to teaching. They got married and they went to church every Sunday.
5 minutes after his hearing began, William Tommy Smith got the board's vote. They were convinced they could tell Smith was a new man.
How does somebody convince you I'm not violent anymore?
It's a number of factors. It's not just one thing. It's a whole package of things. To me, you never know for sure. You know, you really don't. But you make as good an informed decision as you can.
Smith's record stayed clean for less than 2 years. He was arrested on a drug charge in 2015, charged with domestic violence the year after that. And then, after the death of his wife, he started seeing the woman he's now accused of killing last December.
The morning he came here, right after he did it, I couldn't believe it. I mean, somebody just walks in that you know, and you know them to be pretty much all right. And they say, "I just killed Brenda, killed her with a ball bat."
Like all the other pardon hearings, the board tried to help William Tommy Smith, gave him a chance to start over with a clean slate. But without firm guidelines for which crimes are pardoned, the board relied on their own opinions, which in this case may have got it wrong.
If I look back on it, probably I would say, boy, we probably made a bad decision. But at the time, with the information that we had at that point in time, we tried to make a good, informed decision.
Well, it must not have been right, because he went back and did what he did a month ago. He might not have known that was still in him.
No, you never know what these people are going to do. Do we always get it right? Probably not.
William Tommy Smith is behind bars tonight and charged with murder. His sister wanted me to add that his life, like many others, was destroyed by drugs, and says it was drug use that made him lose control. The Pardon and Parole Board, they've got another 67 hearings scheduled for this Wednesday.
So, Gordon, you've given us quite the behind-the-scenes look here at this pardon process, one that I've never seen before. And sometimes the decision the board makes, admittedly from their chairman, is not the right decision. What is this doing to the safety of each and every one of us?
So there's a lot here. First of all, we mentioned the fact that the convicted felons can get their gun rights back. There's federal law in particular that bans felons from going out and getting a new weapon. And one thing we've seen a lot of law enforcement agencies do in the upstate is when they're having difficulty keeping known criminals behind bars, if they can catch one of them with a weapon they're not supposed to have, they can refer that for federal prosecution and sometimes get a very lengthy prison sentence attached to it. But because of all these pardons, someone who maybe had a felony on their record can go out and get another gun, and police lose tools like that to prosecute cases against people who they would otherwise be able to keep off the streets. There are also, by the way, Tom, changes in the way that some of these cases might be prosecuted. For example, somebody gets a criminal domestic violence after a pardon. That's their first offense now, even though they might have had several other arrests in the past. It's a very complicated issue, Tom, but it is one that all of us are going to continue to face for the next few years, and I put everything you need to know about this story and about pardons on WSPA.com.
All right, you put a lot of work, a lot of time into this, Gordon, and certainly a very insightful story there. Thanks very much.
If you've ever been to Greenville County Square, hopefully you've noticed that black granite wall. It bears the names of thousands of our veterans.
What you may not know is that wall, our county's most visible reminder of heroic sacrifice, only exists because one man made it happen. And now new development may put that historical marker at risk. The wall itself is imposing, almost intimidating. A black granite barrier that frames Greenville County Square. There are more than 6,000 names carved into this rock. Every letter appears to be a permanent legacy, and all of it's written by George Blevins.
There's interesting stories here. I promise you, it's all different life.
George has probably shaken the hands of most of the men honored here. His own sweat is the only reason they're remembered this way.
You're a veteran and you deserve to be honored. Yeah, your family can look at that for years.
Back in 1996, the 25-year Air Force veteran was in the middle of his 30-year career in Veterans Affairs, his office in a far corner of County Square, where George felt the men and women he served each day weren't getting their due.
I kept saying there's nothing in Greenville County, if you think about it, here at County Square is big, and nothing says, thank you, veterans.
So George picked up a pencil, sketched a few columns, and carved out space in his own garage. That's where he built this model, enough to shop around and try to raise money.
When you're in the middle of purchasing a monument, when you're just nobody, you know, how would you purchase a monument, you know?
They don't have any idea how hard it was.
No, sir. No one has any idea what could possibly happen.
The money, though, was a problem. The county wouldn't pay. The American Legion offered 10 grand, but that wasn't nearly enough. So George Blevins, the veteran who honors veterans, came up with the idea of letting veterans honor themselves.
Several books of this. Yeah, I've got them in the back, and I've got them everywhere.
George asked veterans and their families to help pay for their memorial. Each of these names is a family George contacted personally. The deal was $35 a name. The only requirement is that it be the name of a Greenville County vet. The response was enormous.
It's David Cummings, Furman Cummings, and John Frank Cummings. It's just one way to honor them and give them, and these guys loved it.
Emma Cummings and her brothers-in-law were among the first to sign up. John was in the Navy during World War II. David and Furman served in the Air Force.
The youngest of these guys, he was in service. He has 3 grandchildren in service right now, and they're in their early 20s. So it just...
It's the family business.
Yes, yes.
Over the years, the wall kept growing as dozens of other families honor their bond of service. It's been a focal point for 20 years' Memorial Day ceremonies. It got so popular, George hoped to gather enough veteran names to line both sides of the entrance to County Square. He wanted to call it Veterans Boulevard. That will never happen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
This year, County Council voted to sell County Square to a private developer's billion-dollar project. The government buildings will come down, and all that granite has got to go.
If you destroy those names of those people, put that on honor those veterans, I think that would be a very big, bad situation for someone.
There's a plan for a new Veterans Park in the city of Greenville, and there's a chance the columns and wall dreamt up by George Blevins will relocate intact.
I made sure I got these two on there.
But it won't happen without the vision of someone like George, someone who can turn an intimidating job into an impressive honor.
I can't believe I did it. It's honestly something that it's there, and I know I did it. You just have to believe it. It's just something you do.
Well, he did do it, didn't he? You may have heard of the plans for what would be called Unity Park in downtown Greenville. The current plan would put that Veterans Memorial on property near the old Public Works facility. You saw it in the story behind that chain link fence. But they still need good ideas and millions of dollars to preserve the investment all those thousands of veterans have made on that wall. And of course, George Blevins will be among those, Amy, trying to make sure that happens.
Yeah, you know, have no doubt that George Blevins will be there and be right in the center of what happens. Can they, Gordon, get maybe these developers with the billion-dollar plans to help pay for the cost of moving the whole thing, or what are the options?
So that's not part of the deal for the property at County Square, but there are people trying to raise the money to get that done, and there is a group working on it right now. The challenge really, I mean, if you've seen it, it's these big granite blocks that go down into the cement along the road, right? So getting that out of the ground intact without breaking anything and getting it across town is going to be a massive mechanical challenge that they still haven't really solved.